Hello everybody, this is Refresh, and I am here to tell you about my Dominaria United Sealed Deck experience at pre-release. It's the usual fare. You get a pre-release kit which contains 6 packs of Magic the Gathering, and then you take those packs, build the best deck you can, and you play it against your opponents for some number of rounds determined by your store. At Emerald Knights, where I played this at, right here, in Burbank, California, this is 3 rounds. At Emerald Knights, they have also instituted a flat prize structure, so everybody who plays gets 2 set boosters. Here are my set boosters that I got for playing all 3 rounds. There's no frills to this particular format in pre-release. You get all the usual stuff as in most pre-release kits. Let's take a look at this pre-release kit. As you can see, Wizards are continuing with the cardboard outer box, and so you get this sleeve with some Dominaria United art on the outside, and then on the inside, as you open it up, you'll see that there are holes all over the place. So this is the deck box, but these holes contain counters and tokens that you can use, so that is a nice use of the packaging. I appreciate that, especially because counters and tokens are things that you'll need. Inside here, you also get 6 packs of Magic the Gathering, as well as a spin down life counter featuring the Dominaria symbol. These are going to be the standard 5 colors. You get a guide to how to build the deck for sealed, which is some pretty basic information. I'm sure that it would be better to get more information than this, but if you really have no idea what to do, then this will give you the basic build for a deck. And on the back, there's information about the Planeswalkers and some of the characters, because Tanith is not a Planeswalker, that are involved in this storyline. It's just some really short bios. There's no really explanation for what this is. Usually this is a bit more thematic, but in this case, we just get some short bios. And I guess it's better than nothing. I'll take it. And then you also get a card divider using this beautiful stained glass art. And then you get your packs of Magic the Gathering, including a promo. My promo was the classic Painland Yavimaya Coast. And then I've gotten a bunch of tokens, and then a few things to note in my packs. I got some foils, but I think the most interesting pulls here are this particular borderless Karplusan Forest, which is a second Painland. Got this inside the pack, so I guess they're doing this borderless thing, so that looks really cool. You'll also get a code that you can use to get 6 packs on Magic Arena. I've already used this particular code, so don't bother typing this in. But every time you go to pre-release, you get 1. But I think you can only use 1 of these per account, so going to additional pre-releases won't get you any more packs. Now I'll show you the tokens and the counters that were included. These have 2 tokens, which are very generic. You can use them as anything. And so I think when you don't get the right token cards in your packs, then these are reasonable substitutes, since you're not going to mix them up for anything else. And they're card shaped, so you can tell if they're tapped. So I think that's what these are. But if you know that they're supposed to be used for something else, please let me know. You also have to get these double-sided counters, which are fairly generic. I don't think that these are supposed to be stun counters specifically, but because these don't have numbers on them, we use them as stun counters in the set, because that is a new type of what I think is going to be an evergreen mechanic in Magic the Gathering. So stun counters. It does the Frostlinks effects, which is it taps down something and then it doesn't untap on the next turn, or in this case, as long as it has a stun counter. And then when it goes to your upkeep, you remove a stun counter, and then if there are no stun counters, it would untap. So that's what these things are. The Story of Magic Gathering, which you can read on the website, is pretty cool. There's a Phyrexian invasion going on. Some of our favorite characters turn out to be sleeper Phyrexian agents, and there's a big fight between all the characters in Phyrexia. Now I'll show you all the cards that I opened. So this was my card pool. One of the things that I had to note right away is that 3 of my rares were actually lands: the Karplusan Forest, Plaza of Heroes, and the Yavimaya Coast. 2 Painlands. And so already a lot of my rares were taken away by being lands, and then I had Urza Assembles the Titans, which is almost useless in sealed. And then on top of that, the other 3 rares were the only real rares that I could look at as possible cards that I would want to play. I mean, I'd play the lands, obviously, if they were in color, but I had the Raven Man, which is a decent rare. I had Drag to the Bottom, which is a board wipe in black. And then the other rare that I was the most interested in was the Shivan Devastator. And so that was going to make sure that I would splash red for that no matter what. The cards that were not rares and in the specific colors weren't that exciting, and so I had a really hard time trying to figure out what to do. I eventually ended up looking at my uncommon legends, so I got 6 of them, 1 per pack, and then I tried to decide which of these were going to sort of drive the story here. So there were basically 2 camps that I could have went into. So the first one was the Mardu go wide sack strategy. So Baird, Elias Lakor, and Garna Blood Fist of Keld sort of all work into that strategy. The problem with that is I didn't have a lot of sources of token creatures, and so I was a little hard pressed to get much advantage of losing my creatures, of sacrificing my creatures. And so without amazing removal, aside from the board wipe drag to the bottom in black, I wasn't really inclined to play that particular deck. The other deck that I really considered was the Jeskai Instants and Sorceries deck, which has Najal and Tura Kenrod Sky Knight as the payoffs. So Tura will create 1/1s whenever I cast Instants and Sorceries, and Najal will let me copy Instants and Sorceries. And there, I didn't have any other big payoffs within the colors, aside from perhaps the Tolarian Terror in blue. But I had plenty of enablers, like I had a good number of low mana tricks or tempo cards in white and blue that made me want to play that. And then in red, I had 1 single bit of removal in the Herloon Battle Hymn. And I think that together ultimately convinced me, along with the pair of Idyllic Beachfronts and the Molten Tributary in my lands, to go ahead and build a Jeskai deck. This is the deck that I ended up building. The linchpins of the deck are Najal the Stormrunner and Tura Kenarud Sky Knight, both of whom are payoffs for casting instants and sorceries, and so that's pretty much where I went. The 2 other cards that really play with that are the Tolarian Terror, which gets cheaper for instants and sorceries, and the Haunting Figment that can become unblockable with instants and sorceries. I guess I also have an Academy Wall, which lets me loot whenever I cast an instant or sorcery. And then I have some instants and sorceries. I have a couple impulses to act as card selection, take up the shields as combat tricks and ways to blow out my opponent. These also give counters, and I keep forgetting that. I keep thinking that they're just adding +1/+1, but they actually give counters, which makes them pretty good. I have 2 stalls for time and a Tolarian Geyser as tempo plays, and then my removal is the single Herloon Battle Hymn. I also have a Meteorite as a bit of Ursat's removal, but I found that in this format there's a lot of 3+ toughness bodies, and the 2 damage is not quite as good, or at least not within the games that I was able to play. Other than that, we also have the Flyers theme, so I kind of want to slow down the ground here with the Academy Walls and some just regular dudes at the very bottom, and then I have Flyers to get in for the win, so the Soaring Drake, the Cleaving Skyrider, Talus, Lookout, Coalition Sky Knight, as well as Tura can all get into the air, and then my Mythic I put in here because if you can play a Shivan Devastator, you should play a Shivan Devastator. That's just like scales, it's flying, it's haste, you can sneak out of nowhere and get the win. So that's, I think, a card that if you could fit it into your deck, you should fit into your deck. It only costs 1 red mana. Unfortunately, I had the splash to do it with the Molten Tributary, and then the Meteorite acts as a secondary splash as well. In addition to what you see here, I also added 6 islands, 5 plains, and 3 mountains. And that was the deck. So I took these decks into battle in my 3 matches. In my first match, I was up against a player that was playing a 5-color domain deck. And so in the first game, my opponent managed to play a Soul of Windgrace, but ultimately I was able to clog the ground up and then swing in with Flyers, which my opponent had no defense for the win. And it helped that my opponent flooded just a little bit, so even though they were getting plenty of value from their Lord Windgrace, they just didn't have means of getting through. In the second game, I actually mulliganed to 5 on the first turn, dropping a hand that had off-color lands, and then the second hand had no lands. And so I went down to 5. But I was actually somehow able to stall out. I think my opponent just had a really slow build, and then the flyers that I had paired really well with the tempo plays that I had with like stalls for time, especially playing a great role along with the 4/4 elemental that put the stun counter on your opponent's creature, that basically took out my opponent's attackers long enough that my flyers, which my opponent didn't have the tools to block, were able to finish my opponent off. And so I took the first match 2-0. In the second match, I was up against a player that was playing a white-green deck but had some additional lands for domain. And in the first game, I kept the 2-lander, and that was fine, but my opponent was much more aggressive than me, and they had a creature that was able to pump all of their other creatures, and basically they went wide around me and stomped me down. On top of me having a slow start with not a lot of early plays. And so that I lost. And then we went to the second game, and pretty much the exact same thing happened. My opponent was able to go even wider this next time, and so even though I was able to field a slightly better board this time around, my opponent was just faster, was able to get in chip damage early, and then eventually went so wide, and then was able to play a pump spell to get lethal on me. And so that was the end of that, and I lost going 0-2 in the second match. In the final match, I was up against another white-green deck, and in the first game, I basically won because my opponent got mana screwed, and there's really little that you could do if you are going to get mana screwed. Now, I was also mana flooded, but I actually managed to have a couple big threats in my hand at the very start, and so I was able to play them, and that was just enough. My opponent was not able to cast anything substantial. By the time that they were able to cast something substantial, I had threats that they had to block, and they could only play one creature per turn because they were mana screwed, and so they were forced to chump until I managed to take them out. In the second match, I went mulliganing to 5, and so it was a pretty brutal start. My opponent was able to play a bunch of creatures and eventually go wide, and I died. I just rolled over because my opponent had just more cards than me, and so that was that. And then in the final match, I might have flooded, but I also had flyers, and ultimately that match was the longest match. It was grinding all the way to the end, and my flyers were eventually able to get me there, but that was after just top decking over and over and over again, and eventually I was the one that top decked a little bit better, and that is how I won. And so I went with a 2-1 record, and then that was that. There's no real way to end the experience other than collecting my prize packs, these 2 set boosters, and calling it a day. Overall, I felt that the Dominaria United pre-release experience was pretty on par for most pre-release experiences. There's not much ado aside from the promo card that you get and getting to play with the set early. You also get, I guess, this spin down life counter, but it's a very low fuss experience, and there's not much to the experience that really adds to the theme besides the cards themselves. And so I kind of wish that there was a little bit something more that Wizards could have done to make this return to Dominaria more interesting, but as it was, I still had a pretty good time, so there wasn't a whole lot to complain about. Although I will say that my card pool was definitely suboptimal, so I was pretty impressed that I was able to go 2-1, even with so many of my rares being lands, of all things. That is it for my Dominaria United experience. Let me know how your Dominaria United pre-releases went in the comments below. If you got any rad pulls, also let me know. If you found this video enjoyable, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of my videos, you can hit subscribe. This was Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.